they've also used this. They've they've worked gone through the content of the game's code to try to figure out the stuff that we'd only partially implemented and never.
We had a golf game.
There's a golf game mode. There's one
Jerry
called
T
Airmail.
was a scooter. Is a scooter.
Yeah. But they're just partially implemented, so they're janky and they don't have fully thought out people are making airmail levels.
What?
And
that's illegal.
Hey, Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 386 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast, Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the GUI programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist. It's gross.
And spooky, which is
you should kind of get hosed down probably. If you're
get that goo off.
Yeah. This is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's October 2022.
What?
Right?
2022.
October 2022. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity and confusing date formats in this show. So if either of those things don't appeal to you, then you just leave. You don't have to be here.
No.
Yeah, it's true.
There's plenty of great radio out there for you to check out.
And there's a lot of horrible ones too, So
there's a lot. Yeah, there's a wide range of content available.
That
Very
is the
quality.
main problem. You're best off sticking with us because if you go out, start wandering out in those podcast woods,
You never know what'll get you.
you're gonna get.
And honestly,
attacked by,
I feel like
yeah.
we're already past the confusing date format part now. That's done. I don't think we're going to revisit that. So if that was the part that you were struggling with, then you're good to go now. Yep. Yeah, we're good. Also, we'd like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. We got a donation and a message from Haas, who said, this is funny. Haas said, I was actively working on a non-gaming project with ClickUp, which is that's a productivity tool that we used to use.
A quote-unquote productivity tool.
Haas says, it started to do the dropped task and updates thing. Mid-project, I switched over to Favro. Within a day, I bought in, and I'm so glad about it. In my rush, I forgot to use your promo code. So here you go. Thanks for all you do. So here we just got a donation from somebody about a thing, about a product that we got sponsored by. That's called double dipping, folks. That's how you do it.
And I would prefer, that the money come to us. But here's the thing, actually, is everybody won here because they're still getting your money when you're paying for your subscription, and then we also got some of your money. So, I mean, and then Favor gave us money to sponsor.
It's all good.
Podcasts. It's just
oh man, what a wholesome day. I feel so good about all of this. This is just great. Also, I'd like to thank our recurring supporters as well. Of course, thank you very much. We appreciate it. So this is a strange time.
I mean,
it's a strange time for starters.
Specifically,
October, which is spooky. But right now we're about to record 3 podcast episodes back to back.
Too bad.
Okay, because I'm about to leave for India for 2 weeks tomorrow. So I'm going to be away. I'll be out of the country. No podcast. Probably bad, latency on hotel Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So no chance of.
You'll be jet lagged, which adds sort of a mental latency in,
Yes.
Even if the latency problem was solved. So I think it's one of those you don't want to do that. Not good.
So we're gonna pre-record 3 episodes. We're gonna do a lot of unhinged question answering over the next few episodes, and there probably after this one there won't be any current news because we don't know what's going to happen.
And we'll have run out of current news because almost nothing is happening, but just in the whole world.
In the whole world, if you look around, it's just
quietest time I think that has just ever existed.
Everything's pretty chill.
Yeah, totally chill.
That's great. But yeah, I'm very excited to get back to India. I haven't been there since 2019. Usually we'd go every other year, but then some stuff came up, so
some things happened.
Was the last time that you went when you had that horrible mouth, throat ulcer that was just there the whole time?
Oh no, that was the first time I went. The most recent time I went, I was there for a couple weeks. It was in November of 2019 into early December.
You just barely slipped under the COVID radar there.
Except when I got back, I was sick for 6 weeks.
Oh, that's right.
With a weird cough.
With a strange, I had pneumonia. I had a cough. I had a variety of rotating cold and respiratory symptoms, and I got tested for the flu and everything else. It was not a bacterial infection. It wasn't the flu. They didn't know what it was. Just mysteriously got pneumonia at the end of 2019 after traveling home from India.
But I don't think it was in India at that time, you know?
It had to have been.
I don't know 100%. What it was, but it was the worst I've ever felt.
The thing is, there are so many respiratory illnesses, you know, just so many.
So either I got COVID and I was patient 0, or I just got all of the other respiratory illnesses
all of them
at once, except for the flu.
But also in the context of having so many happening at once, you know, you don't know what the symptoms are going to be like for any given, because now it's all like the interactions between. So
that's true. I might have just gotten 2, and then they sort of did like a Pokemon evolution.
Yeah, it turned into something else.
And turned into a new thing, and then who knows what that is? You know, you could be your own Petri dish.
And now here's a question, because you actually haven't. So since that mysterious illness, you haven't gotten COVID, as far as you know, right?
Yeah, I haven't been sick at all.
So the other thing that may have happened is whatever this stew of 10 to 20 diseases that you had at once was.
Yeah.
Morphed into, whatever it was. But also your body. You were basically a Hulk, because like Hulk gets irradiated. And then the radiation is like, I'm going to fuck you up. It's to such a crazy degree that you're a Hulk now instead of dead, right? And I think that's basically what happened to you is you got fucked up. 6 weeks is a really long time to be sick.
Yep, that's what
it was a long time.
Things don't do that. COVID doesn't even. I mean, COVID has like the the long term sequela, right? But that's a different kind of thing than just being actively like.
Are you saying that Seth basically got like CRISPR infected and it modified his base genes into a
I literally can't die now. I literally can't die.
Zany.
So I'm kind of bummed about that because I feel like I'm going to get bored at some point and probably want to die eventually.
But then you can't now.
Once I've run out of things to
It is true that that whole reality that daily contemplation of the fact that you will die someday is actually a key happiness booster.
It's a great motive. It kind of puts a nice deadline on things.
Makes you appreciate
it makes things
present.
Matter more.
Although I do like that. Did you guys watch The Sandman? The Sandman.
I watched some of it, and then I was like, I don't understand what's happening. And this guy's
trip.
Weird.
That's weird. Yeah. It's weird. Definitely. But there's a because we're following these like gods or whatever, right? So this is also spoilers. But I think
it's been out for a while.
You shouldn't care.
It's been out for weeks.
But there's like the Sandman character or the Sandman god, right?
Morpheus
has this same idea. He's like, people wouldn't want to live forever, actually, right? But so he says that at some point in this like regular human person who doesn't know that this guy is a god, is just like, so what are you talking about? I would love to live forever. And then the Sandman's like, well, do you want to place that bet, basically, right? So, or I think he places the bet with death or something. So he places the bet, and then the guy's immortal now. And then Sandman's like, I'm going to come back and visit you every, I think it's 100 years or something.
Yeah, to see the same tavern.
Because like the same tavern, exactly. So like inevitably at some point you're going to tell me like you want to be dead now, right? And then like 700 years go by, and the guy's just like fucking pumped the whole time, right? I mean, he has like some down periods, definitely, but each time, like even in like the pits of the worst, then the Sandman's like, so that means you're done now, right? And he's like, what? No, and so it's just like he goes through like hundreds of years. It's like to the point where they just hang out every 100 years, right?
Friends.
And it's no longer even about it at all because it turns out at least that guy was having a good time.
There are some people I've met who are excited enough about things baseline that I feel like they would have a more enjoyable time on a longer immortal scale than most. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the problem is immortal is an infinite timeline, right? And so it's not about it being a longer timeline. It's not like, oh man, if they live for twice as long as everybody else, that would be fine. If they live for 100,000 years, would they still be pumped and excited to be here. You know?
Well, but here would be a different place the whole time.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
I think that's the trick. It's like, it's
Well,
sort of
but
like,
think about how fleeting everything would feel. So, for example, if you're like right now, you're like, I could pick up the guitar, you know, and like learn the guitar, and that'd be pretty cool, right? Except if you've been alive for like 10,000 years, then guitars basically just started existing, and also you've seen thousands of other instruments and things sort of come into existence and then also disappear. And it didn't really matter in the end, right? And so the idea of like taking a bunch of time to do this thing that ultimately,
but I think,
it's just like
I
a
think that's the
blip,
beauty
you know?
of it, is that it actually forces you to participate in life with the vibe that you should already anyway. Which
I
is
think,
that
I think this is
the
it's like,
only
it's,
point is what you make of it. you know?
it's like being immortal and being dead kind of caused the same thing to happen, which is that you have to just end up being focused on the present moment, right?
Yeah.
And because like, you don't need to maximize.
I mean, honestly,
Yeah,
living forever is just as conceptually meaningless as dying in 20 years or whatever. You know, like
Yeah,
it's in
you're
terms of,
human.
like,
You can't grok any of this. You
you
know what I
can't grok
mean?
that shit. It is the having lived for thousands of years part. That's the weird one. I don't know what to make of that. That's
true,
But,
yeah.
but like, I mean, I'm even thinking of just because this idea of like, oh, like you're gonna get tired of stuff. You're gonna see the same things you've seen before. You know, it's like we're in the video game space. I spent a lot of time in the web dev space. But the joke is there's a new framework, a new technology comes out every week, you know? And the fact is, I'm pumped every time. I'm like, ooh, fuck yeah. What are they doing now? Like what clever shit do people come up with, you know? And the part that's a bummer is like, I can't just go learn all of it because I don't have enough time.
There's no
I have
time.
I have to get things done on a short time scale, right?
And even if you were
But it
immortal,
seems
you
that
wouldn't be
wasn't
able
true.
to. This
Even if
thing.
what?
no, because the things would be happening faster than you could
Exactly.
personally keep up with.
Yeah, exactly.
Your
They would still
cognition
be
is not immediate, like immense bandwidth, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you can't run out of stuff because people are making stuff the whole time. You know,
Yeah.
Like, there's no.
You can't
It's
keep
the
up.
same idea as like there's like this there's a trailing past behind us, right? That keeps getting longer. There are more and more people that are part of it, but also the more recent it is, the more information we have about it, right? So like the amount of stuff in the past is piling up so fucking fast. I think about this with like I saw stats at one point about YouTube's video uploads. You know, like how the sheer number of like hours of video per hour of just like literal time, right? And it was so almost horrifying, just because like it's kind of like it's like looking into an abyss where you're just like
Probably
this is
like
too big, I don't like this.
100,000 hours. Of
Yeah, it was
video
something like that.
uploaded every hour. Or something.
It was like a lifetime of human video, like hours, right, are being uploaded per hour of actual time. So it's just something just wild, right? And that's just like videos on YouTube, right? But there are people writing books. There are people inventing instruments. There are people inventing new ways of doing things. There are new ideas circulating. You know, there's just so much new stuff happening constantly. That
Now, let me ask you this though, because I think there's a big difference between the idea of you yourself being immortal
and
right?
everybody.
and everybody being immortal. Because I think there's two big problems with everybody being immortal. Like, do you guys watch the new Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power?
Yes.
So this isn't a spoiler, but there's at one point there's just an exchange between an elf and a dwarf,
Right.
and the dwarf is pissed off because he's trying to get this elf to just do something, right? But elves, they'll take 50 years to make a decision about something because they can, right? Because they'll talk about something and be like, no, I'm going to think about that for a while. And for them, for a while is like 50 years, right? Because they have been alive since the beginning of time, and they just don't give a shit, right?
But I have a
But they're
question
still
about
doing
that.
stuff the whole time. Because
Yeah.
even in this moment, because this particular moment that you're talking about was actually not about like making a decision. Although those time scales are going to be different, definitely. Because the time, but the time pressure for most
are
things is
they?
dictated externally, not
Yeah,
by
exactly. Not
how
by your
long you
you don't
live, right?
You don't really get to decide how long you react to something that is happening right now.
Yeah, but it is true that in the case of like in this scenario, right? The elves, because the elves doing the same amount of stuff per day that like we're doing, because like actual experience, moment to moment time is the same, right? And so they got a million things going on, and also things that have piled up for 1,000 years, right? So imagine
Yeah.
like
They got
imagine
some
your
tech
normal
debt.
responsibilities and now having 1,000 years
Yeah.
of tech debt, right?
Which is the real problem because they have a lot of they have infinite bureaucracy and like structures in place to to make it so like to dictate how they make decisions, right? There's all these like
Councils.
hierarchies of people and councils and politicians who have been in office for
And that's the part that
a million years
down, just like, just like everywhere else, right?
Yeah. The longer an institution has existed, the more it kind of ossifies, right? It kind of like turns into just this stony thing that can't fucking move or do anything because it just creates its own rules.
Yeah, it comes to serve itself instead of its original purpose, right? Which is
then the problem too of like if everybody was immortal, in our world, like one of the things that tends to happen with people over time is that they like in their younger years, they're in the exploration phase. We've talked in the past about the idea of the explore exploit model, right? Which is that there's kind of two modes of operating in it. There's first mode is sort of the exploration mode where you're learning about the world, you're learning about the problem you're trying to solve, you're doing your research or whatever, and you're not actually focused. Yeah, and you're not actually focused on producing. You're not focused on like working to like make an income or whatever. This is the idea of like going to college or whatever. And then at some point, you pivot into exploit mode where you take all the stuff you've learned and then you try to capitalize on it to get a big benefit for yourself, right? So one of the difficulties then is once people have explored and like developed a certain pattern of a way of thinking about the world, then they switch over to the mode where they're trying to,
Make
use that.
Yeah.
But if the world starts to change, then what they have learned is no longer as applicable. And so they don't want the world to change because then they'll have to stop exploiting and go back into exploration mode. And so they sort of put the brakes on everything, right? So like at the moment in our current, social structure, as people get older, they tend to be more resistant to societal change because it's incompatible with the way that they have sort of developed of capitalizing on their position in the world.
But
right?
all this is a consequence of what you have to do to just survive and thrive, right? In our context,
right?
Basically,
Because
you don't get to then just like
you don't get a round 2 or a round 3.
Yeah, or because the fact is,
all right, I'm 80 now, time to go back to college.
But also, like if you were 80, whatever, right, and you didn't want to learn anything new, but you also didn't have to earn an income and would be fine, right? You could be fed and clothed.
Then if weird new stuff starts happening in the world, like these newfangled computers,
who cares? You could be grumpy about it if you want to, right? But you're not going to feel like you need to actively prevent it from happening. You're not going to feel like you have to do because you're not trying to protect a certain version of the world that you believe you need in order to survive and thrive in, right? Because you just can survive and thrive. So it's fine, right? So the explore, because explore exploit is supposed to be a loop.
Cool. Yep.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a thing where you explore and then you learn new stuff and then you take the stuff that you knew and you apply it to a problem. And you learn more about the problem, which is part of explore, and then you learn some new stuff about how to deal with it and blah, 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 right? You just keep on doing that. The reason that people get locked in to some way of doing things is because the cost. Yeah. And because of the external pressure saying like things need to happen right now, right? And this is how we do things.
Well, it's cost and it's opportunity cost, right? So if you get out of college, you get into your career, if you reach a point where you are at a high level in your career and then maybe you're in your 50s or something, right? Because you've been in there for a while and then you're like, it's time to make a change, right? Well, now not only do you have to, pay for maybe like the tuition of getting the new degree and whatever, there's also the fact that you'd be starting fresh in a new field, making a lot less money, and you'd be foregoing all of that income that you would have been making in your existing career at the time. Yep. And so you kind of have to, double dip on the costs.
Well, when you have nothing to lose, it's easier to do new things. It's just sort of short.
Yeah. That, right? Well, and it's just the sheer fucking waste of cool human shit. Like you watch these shows like America's Got Talent or The Voice or whatever, right? Where somebody will come in and be like, oh yeah, I've had to work 24 hours a day doing 3 jobs my whole life. I've always wanted to be a singer, and they come out and it's the most beautiful voice you've heard in your whole life, right? Mm-hmm. And then everyone's like, oh, this is such an amazing story. It's so uplifting. It's like, no, this is not, because that's one representative of the fact that there's a just enormous number of people who already are enormously impressive and capable of doing the coolest shit that like it would be great if we could all be able to appreciate, right? But on top of that, all the other people who don't have it yet could. But also, you don't need to. You can just enjoy stuff, right? But like all of that human potential. It reminds me of
talent matching.
Okay, this feels like a tangent, but it's not. This reminds me of Internet Explorer. Okay,
Go on.
Yes.
all right. So web, crazy time.
Intrigued.
People are making websites. People are doing all kinds of cool stuff, right? Microsoft is like, hey, we are a monopoly. So we're talking early 1990s to early 2000s, right? So like, hey, we're trying to be a monopoly, so we bake in Internet Explorer into our Windows operating system because we're dominant in the market, prevent everybody else from coming in, blah, blah, blah. And we have an iron fist closed on the browser market, right? Got some upstarts. Chrome appears. Firefox has been here the whole time, right? But also the pool of people start like moving into these other browsers, and those browsers start like really pushing for cool shit. Like the modern web starts to come into existence, right? Internet Explorer though just holds on, maintains its iron grip, right? And Microsoft refuses to actually update it to adhere to what everybody else is agreeing are the web standards.
There's no stewardship
In this
going on,
context. Yeah. Now in this context, what happens is because I was like, when I started my web dev stuff, that was at kind of the tail end of Internet Explorer still being a thing. Because we had to support it, every web developer in the whole world had to spend about 30% of their time not doing new stuff, not learning
Just redoing their code.
redoing things to make it compatible with Internet Explorer, or choosing not to do things that they could have otherwise done that would have made all of our lives better when we interact with the websites. When like a company was trying to make better, more stable software that could last into the future, right? They weren't able to do those things and instead had to support this legacy tech because it refused to budge, right? And that's the human hours of like
horrifying.
Of fucking waste, right? And that's now that's more concrete, right? But now the whole fucking system we live under is just exactly that. It's just burning people's time.
It's always been that to a degree, right? Because it's like you get it.
Oh yeah.
There's degrees of these things that are like sort of intractable in some ways, and then there's ones that are done for some particular entity's gain in a way that is sort of holding the system back.
Well, I'm going to disagree because the free market economy always allocates resources in the most efficient way possible.
You're right.
Everything's working pretty great.
Oh yeah, it's so good.
Just look around. This reminds me, if you guys see, there's a subreddit called Uplifting News. Have you heard?
It's all the horrifying stuff. Right?
Yeah, I had to unsubscribe from it because it was so fucking depressing. Because it was always uplifting news, like, oh, like this one kid like worked all summer selling lemonade so that he could like pay off the lunch debt of his classmates. I'm like, fucking lunch debt for children? Like, and like, isn't that so wholesome that he like did this for his classmates? I'm like, there's an undertone to this story that we're not addressing, and it's fucked up.
Because it's like it is uplifting what that kid did, right? But the focus is in the wrong place, which is, could you believe in order for kids to not starve at school, another kid had
to go. We put it to child labor first. Not awesome. Not awesome.
Not great. Not great.
So, anyways, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into some questions.
Let's do it.
We did want to talk about some Crash News 2 stuff we've been working on with buffs and debuffs, but we're just going to roll that right into the next episode.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, or maybe not. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, anything could happen. It's going to be like a half hour from now. So who knows? All right, so let's go to questions. Our highest upvoted question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from Quantum Anomaly, who said, old friend of the podcast, Quantum Anomaly, who says,
very old even.
With tools like the Game Changer and fast art pipelines, Crashlands 2 could have incredible modding support. You've talked in the past about wanting to support player-driven content in the original Crashlands and how player-driven content can help grow a community. Are you thinking of supporting modding while making Crashlands 2? So here's the deal.
Yeah, you go ahead. I got thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to be supporting modding in Crashlands 2 in the way that many games support modding, which is
not stopping you.
We're not going to, which is that the tools that we're using now make it far, far easier for other people to come in and edit the data that the game is using. And we're not going to do anything to stop that, but we're also not going to do anything to specifically enable it either. Right. So I think about
not from the jump, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
because I think a big part of it is that the games, this is one of those sort of future dev thing, or basically a deeper investment thing, which is that workshop support by itself does not make a game. It doesn't actually add value to a game. It's sort of a multiplier on the game's value, right? They're two different things. And so,
like people don't buy a game because it has mod support.
Exactly.
They want mod support for a game they like.
Yeah. So to me, actual like Steamworks integration and stuff like that is similar to many things we've talked about in the past. One of those things that to me, I am more on the wait and see approach, which is if the game does as well as, well, I hope it does, then that would be a very fun thing to do. There's other wrinkly questions to have to deal with in those cases, but whatever. It seems like it's a great way to, if you have a game that is, I think, popular enough and successful enough to, in many ways, set the community loose on it and let them essentially, in many ways, keep it alive in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine doing yourself because you don't have the bandwidth for it. I think it's really cool. But yeah, I think it's a multiplier after the fact once you know for real, not like a thing to launch with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And having seen what our truly amazing Levelhead community has done with Levelhead.
Ridiculous.
Which doesn't have all the cool stuff of like Game Changer and all that, right? So it's a lot more like you got to get in those guts to try to figure out what it's doing and make stuff happen. But I don't know how many of the listeners have like hung out in our Discord at all. But if you pop in there, which you should do, and just check out the Levelhead stuff, there's a guy who reverse engineered the binary save file format we have for Levelhead saves, right? To figure out like how to understand all the binary data, like what it means, right? And then created his own editor because there were certain features in our editor that he wanted to just be easier, or like he wanted to do like these big batch things he couldn't do or whatever, right? He made his own whole, it's called Chaos Head or something, like I can't remember what it is. But it's his own whole ass editor that makes fully functional save files, right? And he's like sharing. So they're community members who just like use this editor to like do weirder stuff than we've actually enabled, right? In the normal editor. And they've also used this. They've like, they've worked, like gone through the content of the game's code to try to figure out the stuff that we'd only partially implemented and never released, right? Because we have these like 3 other game modes.
We had a golf game
mode. There's a golf game mode. There's one called Airmail.
Was a scooter. Is a scooter.
Yeah, there's and it's like a one-touch mode that was meant to be for like a mobile sort of optimized sort of thing, right? But they're just like partially implemented, so they're janky and they don't have like fully thought out behaviors. People are making Airmail levels.
What?
And
that's illegal.
Yeah, well, the thing is, somebody asked if that was fine, and I was like,
sure.
As long as when they're publishing stuff, they're making sure that they don't break people's experiences who aren't opting into this, right? Then, who cares, right? It's just fun. But like watching just the amount of stuff that people can figure out and like do when you provide nothing at all. I mean, we don't actively try to prevent it in the case of Levelhead. We just didn't help even in the slightest, right? And people still figured it out. And it's fucking awesome.
And there's a Slay the Spire mod, which I don't think we talked about yet on the podcast, but someone made a Slay the Spire mod where you play as GR18. For those who are familiar. Yeah, for those who are familiar, Slay the Spire is immensely popular card roguelike deck building game where you essentially ascend a tower and you're collecting cards, which are essentially abilities, and it's very, very fun. It's one of my favorites. It's like a really good thing. And then I think Adam, you or Seth, someone pointed me to it maybe 2 weeks ago. This mod someone made, and this is not a low effort mod. This is a very, very well made, very thoughtfully produced mod where you get to play as GR18 in Slay the Spire. There's a whole set of mechanics
stuff from the game, right?
Yeah, the cards they basically scraped. Again, it's like, is this legal? Technically, no, but you know what? This is dope as fuck. So go ahead. So it's like the art, they scraped all of the art from the game. So instead of having like the card borders that look like the level cards in Levelhead, You like summon your GR18 and they have a whole set of new mechanics they developed where you have like levels that you're basically playing, quote unquote, sort of like duration cards that apply effects once you dunk a package. Like
really? I need to actually.
Oh, dude, it's really good. It's really good.
Is there a good like thorough video that somebody's made to showcase this
I don't
thing?
think so.
They just have some screenshots and stuff on the mod page, but
We need a
there's
video.
there's like 80 cards. It's a whole.
it's a full game. Like it's a full game mode.
Yeah, and they added some artifacts too. I got the bumper as an artifact at one point, and I was like, "What is happening? Who? And like, why?" But also like, yes, I love this.
Yeah, and it is, and there is like, there's two parts of this, right? One is like, it's really cool that people do this stuff even when you don't make it possible, right? But it does prompt a question of like, what can you do even if you're not trying to like directly support modding like full on, because that's a whole thing, as Sam said, right? But anytime we're doing stuff about how we implement things, if we always have that question in our minds of like, if we wanted to make it a little easier for people to like get their hands in these guts, right? Mm-hmm. Is there something we could do to like save this thing to disk instead of just only have it in memory, or like this kind of stuff, right? I think those are things that make sense, right? Because I'm even looking at also in the Levelhead community, there's a group of people who came together to try to make their own collaborative Levelhead campaign, right? Like the official community campaign kind of a thing. And they're planned out, who's going to work on what and like how they want it to progress. And they have all these channels dedicated to like working out how to put this thing together, right? And the support that we have in the game is just like the normal sharing levels kind of thing, right? And we have like this like externalized kind of like playlist support that just like interacts with your bookmark system, whatever. It's a janky kind of a sideways support for this kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But even that, like people are using
just enough. Yeah.
To do, but it's one of those questions. Like if we had actually provided a mechanism where people could like drop, in essence, just like drop in their own campaign, right? But on the other hand, the campaign is in there as like a file, so I have a suspicion that they're finding a way to do that. Is my bet.
Well, and that's the question there is always about just like file formats and accessibility, really, because like I'm amazed that people reverse engineered the binary save format of Levelhead.
I know there's
levels.
He has a documentation for it that like describes what each byte does, like what the patterns are and how to like read them, And there's a few question marks. So he's like, I'm not sure what this one is, what. And I remember because Seth and I designed it, and so I was like looking through it and I was like, oh, I know what these ones are. He like hasn't figured out, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't matter because the things that those ones would trigger, like don't matter the context in which they're actually doing it. So they just like used some default value from some random level and it turned out to be fine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just because one of the big accomplishments for Levelhead was the amount of sort of processing and compression we did on the level data to sort of make it, make it more just like to shrink the file sizes down a ton so that we could make it extremely fast and bandwidth efficient, so that if people are playing Levelhead on a phone or whatever and using their mobile data, that it's like under a kilobyte per level.
I think the average level is like 900 bytes or something like that. The last time I looked.
Yeah, so it's like far less than like a PNG image that you would just
it's
get
smaller than like the header on a single web page you visit in your browser, right? It's just tiny.
So you could just play like a billion Levelhead levels and have no issues, right?
Yeah.
But that means
we can store, because we've got a few 100,000 levels stored in our database, right? And it's just totally fine.
Yeah. But that, of course, means that when you're compressing things, it's taking what was originally, if you just had like, let's say you just had like coordinates and like every coordinate had like a tile, like or like an item saved to it or something. That's easy. But then if you start to compress it, then what you're doing is you're stripping out information and you're combining lots of things together, right?
It's getting obfuscated.
So the idea that they would like be able to take the time to figure out all the ways in which we combined the information and collapsed it is just kind of bonkers to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to figure out an approach to take to create that format. And we were starting from the position of like, what are we trying to represent? How do we represent that, right? Going the other way.
Going the other ways.
It is. I mean,
they probably did do a lot of experiments where they would like build a tiny level and like do one thing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Look at the binary and see what came. Just like keep putting things through the pipe and seeing what comes out the other end. So that's pretty cool. But so what we're doing in Crash Lands 2 then is, so is the game changer outputs all of its data in just a parsable JSON format.
Yeah.
But importantly, there's two parts to the data. One is the game data itself, but the other part is all of the schemas that describe the format of the data.
Yeah, that's basically already fully documented for you.
It's
Exactly.
and it even has descriptions in there that explain what the values are supposed to do, because the schemas are what the game changer interface uses to create the editors that we use to manipulate the data. And so if people can reverse engineer a level head level,
yeah.
then taking this JSON file and making some kind of an editor, or even just going straight into that file and just changing values yourself.
Yeah.
Like if you want to,
Seconds
and it's just a file that's just chilling. It's just chilling there in the game files, right? It's like if you wanted to say like, you know what, I just kind of want like all of my crafting to be cheaper. There's a number in that JSON file that you could just change, right? Or if you're like, oh, I want to run real fast, or oh, I want to see like what would a game be like if literally everything just kind of one shot me. Like there's a number that you could just jack up to the max and just have everything do shit tons of damage.
Thing about modding, right? Is that we as the developers can still put together what we think are like well managed overarching player experience kind of archetypes, right? So like for a player who wants to have a largely chill time, we can kind of put together a way
Make your sort of
things
story mode difficulty.
yeah, story focused, right? Where things are just a little easier and right. And for players who want to just like go full on, do all the dope combat stuff and like mid max everything, whatever, we could go to have a kind of a hard mode. We can design the levers to let us kind of tweak them to provide these kinds of archetypes. But we don't want to just provide out of the box the things that we think players will on average actually not have a good experience with, even if they think they would, like God mode kind of stuff, right? Because like God mode is all like it's fun for like a minute and then it's boring, right?
Well, it's only fun in contrast. Like once you've gone through and like gotten your butt kicked by things, then coming back and just being invincible and just one-shotting everything, there's a catharsis to it. But like on its own, right out of the gate, like there's just nothing. There's nothing to it, right?
But yeah, but
enjoyment.
we also don't want, and so because we want to basically guide players to have what we think are going to be like the really good overarching gameplay experiences, right? But if players can opt into their own fully arbitrary, whatever they want kind of experience, right? Then also, if it's a bad experience, they don't. So what? That wasn't our fault, and they don't think it was our fault, right? And so players. So that's one of the fun things about modding is that players can take these ideas they have that were like, oh my god, it'd be so cool if, right? And then they can go try to do it, and then maybe it is cool. Sometimes it's not.
Cool.
Yeah. But either way, they got to go still try to figure that thing out, and we didn't have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we don't have to make community management and community moderation tools, right? So like that was the big concern with the original Crashlands creator was we're like, oh, it'd be great if we could open this up and let people build their own campaigns. But then we faced the problems that we ended up having to face in Levelhead, which is, okay, how do you let people list their content and have other people download it and make sure that it's moderated so that you don't have people, like making big Nazi images everywhere. Because
it's all the infrastructure required to support that is heavy. It's a lot, to say the least.
Yeah. And so at some point you got to say, like, you got to accept what your resource constraints are, which is, all right, we're a tiny team of a few people. And do we want to, and can we afford to just spend all of our time policing content, or can we opt out of that experience for ourselves? If people want to hack into the game files and whatever, we don't care. Like, go ahead. If you want to take our game files and make mods for other games, sure, whatever.
Yeah,
right?
The fact is that like
that's just
modding,
cool.
Yeah, mod support and like hacking and all these kinds of things. The reason they're providing mod support from a technical perspective is not necessarily any harder than just making the game in the first place, because things that make modding easy tend to also make game development easy, right? It's always the other stuff. It's always the people stuff that's hard, right? It's the same deal with like having a multiplayer game, right? It's like, that is technically challenging to do, sure, but there's all kinds of approaches, there's all kinds of tools that are out there, right? Things you can just kind of buy as services that handle most of the hard stuff for you. The hard part is like now there's a whole bunch of people interacting with each other, right? And they're going to weaponize things and they're going to try to ruin each other's experiences.
I
Right?
just saw this with Overwatch 2, which came out recently. They've had this big problem with filling the support roles because apparently just given the overall balance of stuff, support.
So every match is 5v5 now.
Yeah, it's all 5v5, right. And support characters, are like required for your team to do well. But due to a combination of like lack of visibility, some other stuff like that, it's just more and more. It's basically very likely that people like your tanks and your DPS get real salty at the support who might be doing great, but that's what always happens. And so
because now they have someone else to blame for them dying.
Why don't you heal me more? And it's like, quit jumping into the line of fire. I can't heal away your stupidity. Like it's not an option for me.
It's as a healer main in World of Warcraft, I know the experience of having people actively killing themselves in game mechanics and then getting mad at you for not fixing their mistake.
Yeah. So that's
I don't play with those kinds of people anymore, really, but I've been there.
They're having this large problem now where like it's taking a long time for everyone else now to queue because you have to queue in a role. You say I'm damage, I'm tank, I'm support. And there's just not enough supports because everybody who starts playing support is like, this is not enjoyable because everyone's yelling at me, even though I'm doing technically great, but I can't, there's no like, this isn't fun as a person with other people, Yeah.
And because the worse everybody else does, and there are more of them than you, right? Then the worse they all think you're doing.
Yeah. Even if you're doing great. And so it's one of those like,
this is complicated too. Cause there's a similar problem in World of Warcraft, not with healers, but with tanks. And I think, so like one of the things that you'll always have in a role-based game is that different types of people have different roles that appeal to them, but then the mechanics of the game will kind of either make it more or less fun or more or less challenging to fulfill that role to a point where in some cases it's just not worth the hassle, right? And so like in the case of Overwatch, you're talking about how it's an extremely fast-paced game, and as a healer, you can do, a bit to kind of like mitigate people's mistakes or like, if they run out and get wrecked by something, but they live and they come back in, you can kind of like maybe top them up and, heal them a little bit or give them a shield or something like that. But you can't just like straight up keep them from dying. If they just stand out there and get wrecked, right? So it's a very challenging role.
If 4 people get wrecked at once.
Yeah, it's 4 people. Yeah.
Can't heal 4 people all the way.
And so I've had the experience in WoW as a healer where like a lot of shit is going down and then somebody will die. And that person will message me and be like, I didn't get any heals from you for 6 entire seconds. What happened? Right. And I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, every time I push a button, there's a 1.5 second global cooldown. So I was only able to push, 4 buttons in that time. And they just went to everybody else. So sorry, you're dead. Right. But as a tank, there's like several extra layers of challenge because you have to know the layout of the dungeon that you're going into so that you can sort of like guide the group. So there's like an extra layer of knowledge. And as the game sort of matures, as the season progresses and more people are familiar with the dungeons, other people in the group start to sort of expect certain routes that you're going to take. And if you deviate from what people are expecting, then they immediately assume that you have no idea what you're doing and they can start giving you shit about it, right? And on top of that...
Backseat driving, basically.
Well, yeah, and on top of that, you have this strange role as a tank, which is being a tank in a game like World of Warcraft is all about positioning. Your job is to you go and you grab all the enemies and you try to get them into like as tight of a pile as you can.
And point them away from the rest of your friends usually, right?
Yeah, and generally, you want to point them away so that if they have like a big cone attack or if they shoot fire or something, that they're doing that, away from the group and not onto the group. So positioning is really important. But while you're trying to round up those enemies, it is a very vulnerable time because your damage dealers may just decide, hey, this is the time for me to do as much damage as I can to whatever is closest. And if the tank hasn't, if you're trying to round up like 6 or 10 enemies, you just don't have enough
You might lose
time. Yeah. To hit all of them hard enough or do whatever you need to do to kind of get them to start attacking you. And so if you're with a group that doesn't understand what you're trying to do as a tank, then they can actively work against both themselves and you, and they will cause the enemies to be scattered, et cetera, and they'll be pissed off at the tank as opposed to understanding that they're the problem, right? And so there's a big tanking shortage in that game because of that role, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's a combination of how the mechanics of the game blend into the social issues that people have with understanding how their role fits in the group. And how not everything is about them.
Yeah. The thing is, it's actually, you have to acknowledge and design for the fact that people don't want to be responsible for a consequence, right? Like it's just how people work. So
because that hurts your ego. So
so if the game doesn't find a way to make it so that the fact that people will blame everybody else but themselves for anything that happens, right? If the design of the game makes it so that that's really easy, or that certain aspects of the game end up getting the blame concentrated, because basically what we're talking about with like the healing class, right? It's like that absorbs all, because like everyone, it's the classic joke in FPSs, right? It's not that you're better than me, it's that you cheated, right? It's not that I made a mistake, it's that you cheated, like it's always like there's always some other reason that had nothing to do with you. And so if it's really easy to draw focus to that, and that's something that we were thinking about too from design is how do we make it so that when players have something bad happen, which like needs to for a game to be interesting, right, that they are more likely to blame themselves than the game, right? As in, if it's easy for them to feel like it's the game's fault, then that means it's our fault. Now the game is unfair and bad, and now there's our negative review and people screaming at us, right?
Yeah.
But
I don't think there's a way, because
there isn't. But if you don't take that into account at all, though, then you can definitely make things worse than you.
There's layers to it, but it's kind of weird because there used to be this saying. It was kind of like a joke saying in MMOs, but like in WoW in particular, people would say, if the tank dies, it's the healer's fault. If the healer dies, it's the tank's fault. And if the DPS die, it's their own fault, right? And I used to think like, oh, that's true, ha ha ha, right? Except the way that the game works nowadays, it's literally like if the tank dies, it's their own fault, because tanks have all these ways to live. Their whole thing is staying alive, right? And so nobody can really help the tank stay alive that much, but a little bit. Like sometimes
presumably
the tank will get in
also
trouble.
like if their whole thing is having lots of health and your whole thing as a healer is providing health, then like you can only do so much because they have
so much health.
You
your
can't
heals
feel it.
barely move their
Yeah.
like when I heal a damage dealer in WoW, I can take them from like 20% to full in just one heal. When I heal a tank, their health bar moves 10%. I can't do shit to help them. But I can kind of supplement. But what I can do is recognize they're in trouble, and I can do something like stun the enemies to stop the incoming damage for a couple seconds so the tank can kind of help themselves, right? And so what I've kind of come to learn is like, if anybody dies, it's all of our fault.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
It's the team's fault. Yeah.
But the thing is, like, the game really hasn't changed a lot. It's just that I've come to better understand
This is true in
how it works.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about a game like Overwatch, from a player motivation standpoint, is like what you want in any team based, especially like really low number squads, like 5 people, 4 people. The thrill of actually working on a well functioning team is the high point of these games. I mean, League of Legends included. Like, it feels so good to be part of a well oiled machine that is just like cruising like a chainsaw through your enemies. You know what I mean? And so that's what everybody wants. So the question is like, how do you design for that when you do have to make it fun for each individual person? But how do you allow them to back up and see the bigger picture so that they don't start just flaming? Because it's always a problem in team games. People come there to try to get to the team vibe and the team benefit, but then as soon as they have any trouble whatsoever, then blame goes on everybody else.
Well, I think that part is to me less about the mechanics and more about the social systems that the game has in place. Yeah. Is it easy for you to get back into groups with people that you liked grouping with, or people who are positive or who did a good job? Is it easy for you to keep track of those people
or even just to give
sort of
some, end of game feedback to people where League of Legends introduces this thing where you, at the end of a match, it basically pulls up people's portraits and you can just click a button that's like, good shot calling. You basically get to pick a person to give like kudos to, right? Very simple. And I know Overwatch, I think, used to have something kind of similar. I know they don't. Overwatch 2, for some reason, doesn't have any end of game features that are similar to that, which, it seems like a light touch thing. And it is, but it's one of those things that moves the needle a little bit more in the direction of like, oh, if I am nice to people, then I can get a thumbs up at the end of the match.
It's like getting a like on a social media post, right? Like,
it's kind of nice.
It doesn't do anything, but it's like it feeds into that too. A vibe that gives you a dopamine hit, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's such a classic mistake in this space of knowing that these mechanisms exist. And I guess in Overwatch's case, if OG Overwatch already had something like that too, right?
Yeah.
And then treating it like, oh, this is a thing we can add later because we need to get this game out the door, kind of a thing, right? Is fundamentally misunderstanding
What the game is.
The long-term consequences of early social decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like when you don't provide moderation out of the gate, that's how you get Nazis on your platform. That's just like that's just how it works.
Every platform becomes a Nazi platform.
And once you have them on there, it's now a Nazi platform. That's just how social groups work, right?
Yeah, what's the saying? Like, if somebody brings a Nazi flag to your rally and nobody kicks them out, you're a Nazi rally now.
Yeah, it's the same idea. So if you don't provide these mechanisms out of the gate to shape how the community interacts with each other from the moment they start playing, then you end up with cultures developing around just how people are and like the very weak social systems that you have in place, plus like what the game is incentivizing, right? And so if winning and losing has a very like big perceived value and cost to a player, and it's all team-based stuff, and they're all new to the game, right? Mm-hmm. And they're not being incentivized to be nice to each other, or they're not being categorized into like, let's try to push the assholes with each other and like the good people or whatever, right? If none of that stuff is happening, then the assholes make everybody else have a bad time.
Mm-hmm. And
then those people leave. And now it's just the assholes. And then when you want to try to tame the assholes, like
oh boy,
by putting in the features, then like that now you're in it for the long haul. Like that's not gonna.
Good podcast episode title.
It's like a good place to wrap this one.
If only.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. We'll wrap this one. I got a couple more to bang out. So that's all the time we have for this episode. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Jen Coster, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.